My name's Jason Brueck. I grew up in Southwest Florida, Fort Myers specifically. Then moved around a little bit and moved to Nashville back in 2014. So coming up on 8 years now. Sure. My path to being a full-time artist was certainly a little different from a lot of other people. I was born in Chicago, moved to Florida when I was 5. Grew up in Fort Myers. Uh, Went to undergrad down there, and then went to law school right outside Philadelphia, and ended up practicing law for 12 years. I've always been into art, interested in art. When we'd go on family vacations, I was the kid who always wanted to go to the museum. But as far as making it my career, bottom line, it wasn't good enough. I can draw a little bit, I can paint a little bit, but nothing that anyone's going to buy. So the way I fell into it was I hired a digital artist, and I didn't like what he came up with. So I decided to buy a book, watch some YouTube videos, and start creating it on my own. Because I always had the ideas and the concept, I just didn't have a way to execute it. I personally am sort of drawn to digital art because you can do so much with it. You're not relegated to paint and a canvas or a pencil and a pad of paper. You can sort of play around with different genres and sort of create your own style. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, I'm just not a very good illustrator or drawer or painter, so it's almost a process of elimination. When it comes to inspiration, I like to create images using subject matter that I'm drawn to, that I like, because at the end of the day, I feel like you're going to do your best work when you're working with stuff that you have an interest in, that you have a passion for. So I always try and have a connection with it personally, and then create, hopefully that plays out to where the viewer has that same connection. And that can go from the image itself to how I frame it, to the title. I try and put a lot of different connection points into the image itself. Kate and I actually met online, and it was fate, whatever you want to call it. And then at the time when I met her, she was actually doing photography and retouching at QVC. So she had digital art down to a science. She could teach a course on it. I was able to encourage her to start creating her own portfolio and her own work. And she did, and it ended up working out great. So I quit in January of 2014 to pursue art full time, and Kate was about maybe 10 months behind me. And the fact that we're both able to do what we love, I mean, we're very fortunate. I've always been drawn to artwork that sort of has maybe like a counterbalance. Every artist is going to say juxtaposition, but essentially where you've got things that maybe might initially seem at odds with one another. It could be good versus evil, old and new, man versus nature. But when you have a conflict sort of going on in that image, I think it makes for a more interesting piece. So those are sort of the types of artists, or at least the type of artwork that I'm drawn to. Jeremy Geddes is another artist that is remarkably talented. He does a lot of work with astronauts, and if you look at a lot of my work, it's hard to miss the astronauts. But again, very talented guy, has a surreal sort of feel and edge to it, and so I like art that makes you think, and so I like when the image makes you think, the title, everything about it. Like I like art that's engaging. With Kate's artwork, she gets whimsical a lot, and she likes working with, a lot of her work incorporates children and animals, floating houses, so it's almost got sort of a fairy tale type vibe to it. But at the base of it, everyone can remember being a kid in their childhood, where your imagination runs wild, and you see the world differently, and so Kate likes to take sort of that childhood imagination and recreate it as how kids see the world. And so I think people are drawn to that, especially young families and people with kids. So the process, like anything, starts with an idea. And generally it's pretty loosely based. So you've got something, maybe you want to do a piece about courage. I mean, it could be very base like that. And then it's sort of finding that primary focus, whether it's an astronaut or an animal or whatever, and you start with that, and then you build around it. The background oftentimes is the second piece, and it's sort of like putting a puzzle together. A big difference between Kate and I use a lot of found images outside of the astronaut photos. I also like to mess around with old paintings, or I'll take Baroque era paintings from the 1600s and add pop culture elements to it. But at the end of the day, it's taking, whether it's 2 or 3 different images or 100 plus, and cutting them all out, layering them, manipulating each one, because you want everything to look as seamless as possible. And so you want the composition to be right, you want the scale to be right, you want the color hue to be right, the saturation levels. There's a million things, and that's where you get into the fine tuning of Photoshop. Because one thing I like to say sometimes, I like to blur the lines between the real and the surreal, to where you look at something and it has all the elements of reality, but it still has a very surrealistic feel and vibe to it. Kate and I we've got a 4-year-old, his name's Max, and a 1-year-old, her name's Billy. And so when we're not working on art, we're spending time with them. One thing that's great about living in East Nashville, there's a ton of parks around, so we're at the park usually every day or every other day. I like to take a daily trip to the grocery store with Max, and we sort of pick out what we're having for dinner. And so the kids are great, and without sounding too cliche, they make it all worth it, because even though it's great and we're very lucky to be able to do this for a living, it's still a lot of hard work, and which is a good thing. If we weren't working, then it probably means you're not selling enough. But yeah, so just kind of hanging out with them, going to the pool, going to the parks, going to the grocery store, and just being able to both be stay-at-home parents and be there with our kids sort of every step of the way, literally. In fact, Billy just started walking a few weeks ago. So, yeah, I would have to say that's probably my favorite way to spend time.